Was the world truly built on gold, shimmering with the blood of forgotten empires? Did a city, drenched in silver, whisper secrets of a vanished age? Could a plague born of rats and grief extinguish the very flame of an empire? Constantinople, a jewel carved from ambition and faith, held its breath as a shadow fell, a shadow not of war, but of something far more insidious. Let's dive into the story of Justinian, the man who dreamed of Rome, and the horrors that threatened to swallow his world whole. The air hung thick with the scent of incense and ambition in 532. Justinian, a man forged in the fires of a brutal coup, had seized the throne, a whirlwind of legal reforms and military might. He wasn't just rebuilding Constantinople, he was resurrecting an idea, the Roman Empire. And he wasn't content with merely rebuilding. He wanted to reclaim what he believed was rightfully his: the lost territories of the Western kingdoms, the Visigoths in Spain, the Vandals in North Africa, the Ostrogoths in Italy. These weren't kingdoms, he declared, but festering growths on the Roman body, demanding immediate excision. His first target, North Africa. Belisarius, a general of legendary skill, was dispatched with a force of 5,000 cavalry and 10,000 foot soldiers. Imagine the scene: a fleet of ships laden with soldiers and supplies sailing towards the sun-baked coast. The Vandal kingdom, once a formidable power, was crumbling, weakened by internal strife and the slow decay of its foundations. Half the Vandal army was away battling a rebellion, and Gelimer, the last Vandal king, a distant relative of the legendary Gyseric, was a shadow of his predecessor. He could only muster a handful of loyal guards as Belisarius's army marched into Carthage. Procopius, the emperor's historian, witnessed it all. "No one hindered us from marching into the city at once," he wrote, his words echoing across the centuries. For the Carthaginians opened the gates and burned lights everywhere, and the city was brilliant with the illumination that whole night, and those of the Vandals who had been left behind were sitting as suppliants in the sanctuaries. It wasn't a bloody conquest, it was a surrender, a graceful yielding to the inevitable. The city, once a fortress, became a stage for a bizarre spectacle, a mass offering of supplication, a testament to the swiftness of the Byzantine advance. Then came Italy, the heart of the old empire, ruled by the Ostrogoths. Athalaric, a teenage king, was drowning his sorrows in wine, a pathetic ruler surrounded by scheming regents. The land was a patchwork of discontent, a simmering pot of grievances. Theodore, an elderly relative, seized the throne, a desperate gamble to cling to power, but the gamble failed spectacularly. Belisarius arrived, and the Ostrogoths, already weakened by internal divisions, were utterly crushed. The story of the fall of Theodahad is almost comical in its abruptness. He tried to appease Justinian by selling off parts of his kingdom, a pathetic attempt to buy his life. But Witigis, a warrior king, saw an opportunity and seized the moment, brutally murdering the old ruler and declaring himself the new leader. It was a primal scene, a reminder of the brutal realities of power, a king chosen not by birthright but by the clang of steel. Witigis, in a flourish of barbaric pride, announced his claim to the throne in a letter, a declaration dripping with warrior ethos. "We inform you that our kinsmen the Goths, amid offensive circling swords, raising us in ancestral fashion upon a shield, have by divine guidance bestowed on us the kingly dignity, thus making arms the emblem of honor to one who has earned all his renown in war." He wasn't a scholar, a diplomat, or a strategist. He was a soldier, a man forged in the fires of battle, and he intended to rule through strength, not through cunning. Belisarius, however, wasn't interested in a protracted war. He swiftly marched on Rome, the very soul of the empire, and captured it with chilling ease. It wasn't a glorious battle, it was a swift, decisive victory. The Ostrogoths, demoralized and leaderless, crumbled before him, but the triumph in North Africa was short-lived. Justinian, obsessed with restoring the Roman Empire, turned his attention to Italy once more. This time, the conflict dragged on for years, a brutal, grinding war that drained the empire's coffers. The Byzantine tribes of the north, the Gepids, the Lombards, and the Heruls, were brought in as allies, a desperate attempt to hold the line against the encroaching Ostrogoths. It was a stalemate, a bloody, protracted war with no clear end in sight. Then the unthinkable happened. The plague arrived. It began subtly, with a few isolated cases of swellings in the groin and armpits. But it quickly escalated into a terrifying pandemic. The symptoms were horrific fever, delirium, and the grotesque appearance of buboes, filled with pus and decaying tissue. The doctors of Constantinople, baffled and overwhelmed, were powerless to stop the spread. Procopius described the scene with chilling detail. The tale of dead reached 5,000 each day and then came to 10,000 and still more than that. The city was choked with corpses, piled high in the streets and then dumped into mass graves. The air was thick with the stench of decay, a constant reminder of the horror that surrounded them. John of Ephesus, a priest who survived the plague, wrote of a world consumed by despair. Some were desirous of death on account of the utter loss of their children and friends, and placed themselves as much as possible in contact with the diseased, and yet did not die, as if the pestilence struggled against their purpose. The plague wasn't just killing people, it was shattering the foundations of society. Justinian, himself afflicted with the disease, watched in horror as his empire crumbled around him. His treasury was depleted, his armies were weakened, and his people were dying. The eternal peace, a costly treaty with the Persians, was in arrears, and the empire was on the brink of collapse. Meanwhile, Khosrow, the Persian emperor, seized the opportunity. He invaded Syria, sacked the ancient city of Antioch, and demanded a hefty ransom from the beleaguered Byzantines. He then constructed a replica of Antioch, a grotesque monument to his victory, a symbol of his dominance over the weakened empire. But even Khosrow couldn't conquer the plague. As he retreated, the sickness followed him, spreading through his armies and his territories. The plague, it seemed, was unstoppable. Back in Constantinople, the situation grew increasingly desperate. The city was quarantined, its gates closed, and its inhabitants were subjected to strict regulations. But the plague continued to spread, consuming everything in its path. Then a legend emerged, a story of a miraculous cloth, the mandilion, said to bear the image of Jesus Christ. According to the story, the cloth had been given to a king named Abgar in the 4th century, and it was said to protect the city from harm. When Belisarius arrived in Edessa, the people of the city presented the mandilion to him, begging for his help, and miraculously, it seemed to work. The siege of Edessa was lifted, and Khosrow was forced to retreat. The plague, it seemed, had been defeated by the power of faith. The plague ravaged the empire for years, decimating the population and crippling the economy. Justinian, weakened by the disease and disillusioned by the war, lost interest in his grand schemes of conquest. He realized that he couldn't rebuild the Roman Empire while his own kingdom was crumbling around him. The story of Justinian's reign is a paradox, a story of ambition and despair, of glory and ruin. He dreamed of restoring the Roman Empire, but he was ultimately undone by war, plague, and his own overreach. The Hagia Sophia, a testament to Byzantine ambition and architectural genius, stands today as a silent witness to this tumultuous era. Its dome, a marvel of engineering, seems to touch the heavens, a reminder of the empire's aspirations. But as you gaze upon its grandeur, you might also consider the darker side of this story. The suffering, the death, and the devastation that accompanied the empire's rise and fall. Was the world truly built on gold, shimmering with the blood of forgotten empires? Did a city, drenched in silver, whisper secrets of a vanished age? Could a plague born of rats and grief extinguish the very flame of an empire? The answer perhaps lies not in the glittering palaces and the grand monuments, but in the faces of the forgotten, the soldiers who died on distant battlefields, the peasants who succumbed to the plague, and the emperors who dreamed of a world that could never be.